Some days the headlines just hit differently. They don't just report the news, they feel like they're rewriting the map of where things are heading. September 5th, 2025, definitely one of those days. Just a whirlwind, really. Seismic shifts happening all at once across economics, geopolitics, tech, even global health and the environment. So here on the Deep Dive, that's what we do. We cut through all that noise for you. We've gathered your sources from that pivotal day, and our mission is simple. Pull out the key insights, the important nuggets. Think of it as your shortcut to getting genuinely informed without drowning in the sheer volume of it all. I mean, just look at the range. A U.S. jobs report that sent ripples through markets, a huge EU fine for Google, conflicts flaring up, new diplomatic moves, plus major public health news and serious environmental crises unfolding. It really drove home how interconnected everything is, didn't it? Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to explore what these events actually mean for economies, for international relations, maybe even for our daily lives. We'll try and connect some of those dots.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating about a day like this is seeing how events that seem totally separate on the surface, well, they actually reveal these underlying trends, these longer-term shifts will help you see those connections, hopefully offering a clearer perspective than just chasing individual headlines.
That's a great point. Let's start with the economy then, because, wow, the U.S. economy really threw a curveball that day. The August 2025 jobs report landed, and the U.S. labor market, which, had already been showing signs of cooling,
Yeah.
it suddenly looked, well, pretty fragile. So what were the actual numbers, and how did the markets react so fast?
Well, the headline number was startling. The Labor Department said non-farm payrolls rose by only 22,000 in August. That's way, way below expectations. Remember, we'd seen pretty steady, though slowing growth before. This was different. Unemployment also ticked up to 4.3%, the highest in nearly 4 years. And maybe more concerning, revisions actually showed job losses back in June. So it paints a picture of momentum really fading fast.
All right, and the market reaction, instantaneous.
Oh, absolutely. Stocks slipped right away. Treasury yields dropped, people moving money into safer assets, and traders. They immediately started betting on a bigger Fed rate cut, like a 50 basis point cut at the September meeting, not just the quarter point people might have expected before.
So that classic flight to safety playing out.
Exactly, bonds rallied. But it also kicked off this huge debate, right? Is this slowdown just the cooling the Fed wanted to fight inflation? Maybe necessary pain after earlier tech layoffs and slower spending? Or is it the first real warning sign of something worse? A deeper downturn, maybe even recession?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. The takeaway is the Fed's now caught in this really tough spot. Fight inflation or prop up a weakening job market. The odds suddenly shifted dramatically towards more aggressive rate cuts, which, could mean a volatile time for investors pushing them to safety like bonds, but maybe, just maybe, opening a door for tech if rates fall hard. That soft landing narrative, it's looking a lot less certain now.
Definitely complicates things. Okay, so from the U.S. economy, let's zoom out. Over to Europe. A really familiar tech name faced a major challenge, Google.
Right.
The European Commission slapped them with a fine close to about $3.5 billion for abusing their dominance in ad tech. Basically, favoring their own advertising tools.
Yeah.
This is the fourth big EU penalty for Google. And the U.S. Justice Department is pursuing similar stuff too. What's the real story behind this fine? Beyond just the money.
Yeah, it's the fourth one. And the deeper story, I think, is that Europe's really digging in its heels. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. It signals a serious, maybe irreversible push to break up the power of these huge digital platforms. It's almost like a blueprint for how regulators globally might start tackling these gatekeeper companies. It forces a fundamental rethink of how online advertising works.
And the political reaction.
Immediate. President Trump called it discriminatory against a U.S. company, even mentioned possible trade measures against the EU. So it instantly complicates those already tricky US-EU trade talks.
Yep.
Publishers and Google's rivals, they obviously welcome the tougher line. But some industry groups warned about market disruption, especially with the EU's Digital Markets Act already tightening the screws on these big players. It's a real reshaping of the digital marketplace.
So regulators are pushing back hard. But interestingly, on the same day, the market itself was sort of redefining the tech landscape in its own way. After the markets closed, S&P Dow Jones indices announced a big shakeup for the S&P 500 index.
Yeah, that was significant news too.
Robinhood Markets, AppLovin, and MCore Group are in. Caesars Entertainment, MarketAxess, and Enphase Energy are out.
And that matters, right? Getting into the S&P 500 isn't just about prestige.
No, not at all.
It means all those huge passive index funds have to buy your stock. which boosts demand, liquidity, valuation.
Mm.
The sources pointed out this really marks a kind of arrival for Robinhood. It cements app-based finance and mobile advertising as truly mainstream pillars of the market. And it just continues this longer trend. We've seen the S&P 500 index tilting more and more towards software, platforms, digital engagement. That's where the market clearly sees the growth.
Speaking of digital engagement and tech's evolution, this rapid AI adoption, it's bringing incredible speed, but also some pretty surprising risks.
Definitely.
There was that study by Piro, found that AI coding assistants, they can make engineers 4 times faster. Great.
Yeah.
But they also introduced 10 times more security vulnerabilities into the code.
That is a really stark trade-off, isn't it?
It really is.
And it perfectly captures these growing pains we're seeing with AI exploding since, 2023. The efficiency is amazing, it's undeniable. But the deeper insight here is that this isn't just a tech problem. It immediately triggers calls for, well, stronger regulation, for big investments in tools that can automatically review code, and really rethinking security from the ground up. Because the innovation is just moving so fast, maybe faster than our ability to make it secure.
Right. And sticking with tech's huge impact, another headline from September 5th just captured the sheer scale of ambition, maybe even controversy, in the industry. Tesla's board proposed this historic pay package for Elon Musk. If it gets approved, based on hitting some really aggressive growth targets, he could become the world's first trillionaire.
A trillionaire. It's almost hard to even comprehend that number.
It really is. What kind of ripple effect does a headline like that have, beyond just finance, in public discussion?
Oh, it definitely throws fuel on the fire. It pushes that whole debate about wealth inequality, about executive pay, into completely new territory, especially linking it to these huge, maybe achievable, but still massive growth targets.
You'd expect pushback.
Absolutely. Regulatory scrutiny is almost guaranteed before any shareholder vote. It forces a much bigger conversation about, what corporations prioritize and how the immense value these huge tech companies create gets distributed.
Okay. So looking across this whole economic and tech picture from just one day, you see these powerful forces sometimes pulling in opposite directions. A global economy showing real signs of strain, regulators trying to rein in tech power, and these new technologies bursting onto the scene with both huge promise and serious challenges.
Exactly. A lot of moving parts.
Definitely. Okay, let's pivot now. Let's shift to international relations. The U.S. rolled out a new tool for a problem that's been around a long time, sadly.
Right, the hostage diplomacy issue.
President Trump signed an executive order creating this new label, State Sponsor of Wrongful Detention. It gives the State Department power to officially designate countries, which then unlocks things like sanctions, visa bans, export controls.
And they specifically mentioned rising tensions with Iran, Russia, China, the authorities in Afghanistan.
Supporters hope this might finally change the calculation for governments using detainees as bargaining chips. But critics are worried about blowback.
Yeah.
How do you weigh those?
It's such a difficult balance, isn't it? Washington's been grappling with this for years, how to deter governments from unjustly grabbing Americans for leverage. The intent is clear, create a real cost, a real deterrent. But the critics have a point too. Could it backfire? Could it make regimes dig in their heels even more? Could it damage those quiet diplomatic channels you often need? Or even put diaspora communities, people with ties to those countries, at greater risk? It's tough. Finding leverage without slamming the door shut on potential solutions is, well, it's the core challenge.
A very fine line. And unfortunately, moving from diplomatic tools to active conflicts, the situation in Gaza was escalating sharply on September 5th.
Yeah, tragically.
Hamas released new video showing 2 Israeli hostages. Israel then intensified its strikes on Gaza City, took down a high-rise building they said militants were using, though Palestinians disputed that claim.
And then the very next day, warnings for residents to flee another area before more bombing.
Amid all this, what were the key complexities playing out, both humanitarian and diplomatic?
It's just an incredibly volatile situation. President Trump did say the U.S. was in very deep talks with Hamas trying to free the remaining captives, and he issued warnings. So there's intense diplomatic pressure happening. But at the same time, you had human rights groups strongly condemning these strikes on densely packed urban areas. Those horrific accusations of genocide were resurfacing. The crucial insight, I think, is that this relentless cycle, the violence, the competing claims, the sheer scale of the humanitarian crisis, it creates this almost intractable knot. It makes finding any path forward, military or diplomatic, incredibly difficult. De-escalation seems so far off.
Yeah, deeply concerning. Meanwhile, another major conflict zone, Ukraine also saw significant developments. Ukraine hit targets deep inside Russia with long-range drones, including a major oil refinery, Rosneft's Ryazan facility.
Trying to disrupt fuel and money, right?
Exactly. It showcases a key strategy, hitting Russia's economic and logistical weak points. Asymmetric warfare.
But there was more that day, too. Some verbal escalation.
Yes. President Zelensky mentioned the possibility of thousands of foreign troops potentially deploying to Ukraine after the war under some kind of allied security guarantees. President Putin's response was immediate and sharp.
Yeah.
Any foreign troops on Ukrainian soil would be considered legitimate targets.
Yeah.
So the deeper implication there, it's a clear ratcheting up of the rhetoric. It makes future diplomacy even harder. And it definitely fuels the debate in other countries about sanctions, military aid. It just raises the stakes for any kind of international involvement.
And adding even more tension in Eastern Europe, those familiar military exercises kicked off.
Ah, the Zapad drills. Yes.
Russia and Belarus started their joint Zapad 2025 exercises, featuring nuclear-capable weapons, hypersonic missiles. It set off alarm bells in NATO countries, didn't it?
Yeah.
Especially given the history.
It absolutely did, because past Zapad drills, particularly the one right before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, well, they're seen now with deep suspicion.
So NATO doesn't see them as just routine training.
Not entirely. The strategic alarm is real. These aren't just exercises, they're a show of force, a political signal. NATO immediately responded by planning its own maneuvers. The U.S. pledged more support to Poland. It just highlights the ongoing tension, the constant worry about miscalculation or deliberate escalation in the region. That historical context looms very large.
Okay, let's jump across the Atlantic. Tensions were flaring up in the Caribbean, too.
Between the U.S. and Venezuela?
Yeah. U.S. officials confirmed they'd moved more stealth fighters, more Navy ships into the region. There were reports the U.S. was even considering strikes against cartel targets inside Venezuela.
President Trump tried to dial back the regime change talk later, but kept the pressure on. And then that provocative Venezuelan flyby near a U.S. warship just added fuel to the fire.
What were the main worries in the region about this?
Well, Venezuela is already facing huge humanitarian and migration crises, right? So neighboring governments were urging restraint, terrified that any U.S. military action could just destabilize things even further. Analysts warned that even supposedly limited strikes could easily escalate, maybe triggering clashes with Venezuelan forces or their proxies.
But there was another side to it.
Yeah, supporters of a tougher stance argued you simply can't allow transnational criminal gangs to have a safe haven. But the big concern is that spillover effect worsening migration, more economic chaos, and an already fragile area. High stakes.
And then, bringing things right back home to the U.S., a domestic immigration enforcement action ended up having major international fallout.
You're talking about the ICE raid at the Hyundai plant in Georgia.
Exactly. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE detained nearly 475 people, mostly South Korean nationals. But the initial operation, it apparently only targeted 4 individuals.
Right. That discrepancy caused immediate waves.
What was the fallout?
Well, huge diplomatic fallout, first off. South Korea's government lodged a formal protest, demanded answers from Washington. It definitely strained relations. But beyond diplomacy, it blew up into a big national debate here in the U.S. about worker rights, about the economic impact on that community. And it raised serious questions for multinational companies about compliance, about reputational risk when operating in the U.S. South. It just shows how domestic policy, immigration enforcement in this case, can instantly become an international issue with real consequences for business and diplomacy.
It's a complex web. And beyond those major flashpoints, we also saw signs of significant political change within countries on September 5th.
Right. Internal shifts matter too.
In France, it looked like the government was potentially on the verge of collapse. Coalition talks broke down over big issues: budgets, pension reform, migration. Opposition parties were getting ready to call no-confidence votes.
And then in Thailand, a new prime minister was elected, Anutin Chanvirakul. He's known mainly for overseeing their cannabis decriminalization. His election came after days of political deal-making.
So how do these kinds of internal political situations, a potential government collapse in a major EU country, a new leader in Thailand, how do they ripple outwards?
They absolutely do ripple outwards. A government collapse in France, for instance, that would throw a huge wrench into critical EU debates on the economy, on support for Ukraine. Markets would get nervous about France's debt, its stability. In Thailand, investors and neighbors are now watching closely. Will there be stability? What's the new government's economic plan? How will they handle tourism, infrastructure? The key insight is that even domestic political drama has international consequences. It just adds more layers of uncertainty onto an already pretty complicated global picture.
Yeah, definitely. So we've covered a day packed with new diplomatic strategies being tested, ongoing conflicts heating up, military posturing, and internal politics causing international ripples. The connections are just everywhere.
It really underscores that delicate balance.
Okay, let's shift gears one more time. Let's turn to public health. And on September 5th, we actually got a bit of good news, mixed with some concerning news.
A real contrast, yeah.
The World Health Organization declared the Mpox outbreak in Africa was no longer a global health emergency. Case numbers were down, countries were responding better. That's positive.
Yeah, it is definitely welcome news. But the WHO officials were quick to caution the threat isn't gone. We still need vigilance to prevent it from flaring up again.
And the contrasting news.
At the very same time, tragically, the WHO reported a new Ebola outbreak, this time in the Kasai province of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The first case was traced to a pregnant woman. They confirmed it was the Zaire strain that's the most common, often the deadliest one. Rapid response teams were being deployed immediately.
Wow. So a stark reminder.
Exactly. The critical insight is, even as we celebrate progress against one disease, the fight against emerging threats, especially in regions with weaker health systems, is absolutely constant. There's no room for complacency.
And here in the U.S., those public health debates just kept rolling on, didn't they?
Intensifying, if anything.
That divide over vaccine policies seemed to get wider. You had states like Florida rolling back vaccine mandates for school kids, while others like Oregon, Washington, California were doubling down, reinforcing them.
And a lot of that tied back to the contentious messaging around Health Secretary RFK Jr.'s stance. Experts were warning this growing patchwork approach could lead to real vulnerabilities, regional outbreaks of preventable diseases.
And there was another big health story shaking things up that day, too.
Yeah, a major one for the healthcare sector and potentially millions of families.
Yeah.
The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, announced they had a report coming soon that might link Tylenol use during pregnancy to autism.
Just the announcement caused waves.
Oh, yeah. Kenvue, the company that makes Tylenol, saw its stock drop 10% almost immediately. It just throws more fuel on those ongoing debates about drug safety, especially during pregnancy, about neurodevelopmental risks. It leaves families, doctors, everyone really, waiting anxiously for the actual scientific data. But it highlights how complex these issues are, even with common medications we think we understand.
It really does. Okay, and from public health, we have to look at the power of nature itself. Unfortunately, September 5th brought a lot of devastation on that front.
Yeah, really rough day for weather-related disasters.
Deadly monsoon floods hit parts of India and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Heavy rain swamped areas around Delhi, too. Landslides, flash floods, dozens killed, major roads cut off.
And then over in California, wildfires sparked by lightning tore through parts of historic Chinese camp in Tuolumne County, destroyed homes, historic buildings, forced people to evacuate.
And researchers were connecting that to climate change.
They were. Warning that lightning-caused fires might become more frequent as the climate changes, which complicates everything: firefighting, planning, insurance.
And the storms weren't done yet.
Not at all. Hurricane Lorena was intensifying off Mexico, posing a major threat to Baja California with potentially life-threatening floods and mudslides. And forecasters warned that moisture could even stream up into the U.S. Southwest later.
And on the other side of the U.S.?
A huge weather system put over 30 million people on alert. Northeast, Tennessee Valley, warnings for damaging winds, flooding, lightning strikes. You look at all that happening on one day, it just underscores this accelerating financial burden from extreme weather. It's not just the immediate damage, it's stressing insurance markets, it's demanding massive investment in more resilient infrastructure. It's a huge economic issue now.
Amidst all that,
Yeah.
all those challenges on the ground, there was still that constant push forward in science and exploration.
A little bit of good news looking up, yeah.
NASA and Northrop Grumman finalized their readiness for the next supply mission to the International Space Station. Carrying some pretty cool research, right?
Yeah, really groundbreaking stuff. Research on new germ-killing technologies, experiments in manufacturing things in space, testing ways to deal with space debris. It's that reminder, isn't it? even while we're grappling with all these immediate crises down here, that long-term quest for knowledge, for innovation, it keeps going. And often the solutions developed for space end up helping us tackle challenges right here on Earth, things related to climate, health, materials. It offers that little bit of hope, a glimpse of future possibilities.
Absolutely. So wrapping it all up, September 5th, 2025 really was a day that packed in the sheer complexity of our world, wasn't it? You had economic jitters and the wild frontier of tech. You had geopolitical maneuvering and dangerous escalations, shifting alliances, and then the constant pressing challenges of public health and the environment we all share.
We really tried to take your sources from that single day and dig into what makes these stories truly matter, how they link together in ways that maybe aren't obvious at first glance, and what they might mean for you looking ahead. We hope this deep dive has given you a bit of a clearer lens on it all, beyond just the rapid-fire headlines.
Yeah, we hope it helped you move past the noise a bit to really grasp those underlying currents that are shaping where we're headed.
And maybe, as you think about everything we discussed from that one day, here's a final thought to chew on. How do the decisions getting made right now, whether it's by a central banker, a tech regulator, a military commander, a national leader, how did those choices aimed at today's problems also end up laying the foundation, or maybe the fault lines, for the next 10 years? How are they subtly shaping the world we're all going to be living in?